March 23, 1945. 5:47 hours. The Remagen bridgehead, east bank of the Rhine. Technical Sergeant James Mitchell, 23, crouches in a hastily dug foxhole, watching the tree line 800 meters to his east. The trees are splitting apart. Not from artillery, not from tank fire. From something that sounds like God himself tearing canvas across the sky. A sustained, overwhelming roar that makes individual gunshots impossible to distinguish. The sound doesn't stop, doesn't pause for breath, just keeps coming. A mechanical scream that drowns out everything else. Mitchell has been in combat since Normandy. He knows what German MG-42s sound like, what 200 rounds per minute, the Hitler's buzzsaw that cut through his unit at St. Lo. But this is different. This is 3 M1919 Browning machine guns, mounted together on a single swivel, firing 2,530.06 rounds per minute in a cone of lead that turns tree branches into splinters and stone walls into dust clouds. The Germans attacking his position have never encountered it before. Within 90 seconds, their assault wave simply ceases to exist. Mitchell doesn't know it yet, but he's witnessing the baptism of fire for one of World War II's most fearsome suppression weapons, a weapon so devastating that German after-action reports would describe it with a phrase that translates to iron rain from hell. By March 1945, the Western Allies faced a unique tactical problem that standard weapons couldn't solve. After breaking through the Siegfried Line and crossing the Rhine at Remagen on March 7th, American forces held a precarious bridgehead on the eastern bank. The Germans, desperate to prevent Allied expansion into the industrial Ruhr, launched continuous counterattacks, not with tanks or heavy armor, which they'd largely lost, but with infantry. Waves of infantry. Fanatical, well-trained infantry using every fold of terrain, every drainage ditch, every shell crater to advance under cover. The standard American Infantry Company carried one M1919 Browning 30 caliber machine gun per platoon, typically 3 guns per company. Each fired approximately 400 to 500 rounds per minute, an effective rate hampered by barrel heating and ammunition belts that required frequent changes. Against massed German infantry attacks, often involving 200 to 300 men advancing across open ground or through wooded approaches, 3 machine guns couldn't establish overlapping fields of fire dense enough to stop determined attackers before they reached American positions. The statistics told the story. Between March 8th and March 15th, the Remagen bridgehead recorded 437 separate German counterattacks, ranging from platoon-sized probes to battalion-strength assaults. American casualties during this period exceeded 2,100 men, killed, wounded, or missing. The 9th Armored Division alone reported losing 42% of its infantry strength holding the bridgehead perimeter. The problem wasn't American marksmanship or courage. It was simple. Mathematics. A single M1919 firing 450 rounds per minute could theoretically suppress a 50-meter frontage. But German assault tactics used dispersed formations across 200 to 300-meter frontages, advancing in short rushes between covered positions. By the time a gunner traversed from one group to another, the first group had moved forward. The defensive fire was too thin, too easily evaded. Field commanders requested additional machine guns, but supply lines couldn't keep pace. Each M1919 weighed 31 pounds without its tripod, required a 3-man crew, and demanded significant ammunition reserves, 250-round belts stored in cumbersome boxes. Adding more guns meant more crews, more ammunition carriers, more logistics in an already strained supply system. Ordnance officers at 1st Army Headquarters knew about experimental multi-barrel machine gun mounts developed stateside, primarily for anti-aircraft use on Navy vessels and for testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground. These systems, designated as the T-81, and later T-85 multiple gun mounts, paired 2 or 3 M1919s on a common cradle with coordinated firing mechanisms. They'd been designed for shooting down Stukas and Zeros, not for ground suppression. But desperate times demanded creative solutions. On March 11, 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Thackeray, 1st Army Ordnance Section, authorized the emergency shipment of 14 T85 triple barrel mounts from a depot in Le Havre, France. These units had been intended for anti-aircraft batteries that never deployed. Thackeray's authorization noted, "Recommend immediate field trial for ground suppression role. Current defensive requirements exceed available resources by factor of 3." The mounts arrived at Remagen on March 19th. Nobody had trained on them. Nobody had doctrine for employing them. Nobody even had proper ammunition loads calculated. What they had were 14 assemblies, each weighing 187 pounds fully equipped, each capable of firing 3 synchronized streams of 30-06 ammunition, totaling roughly 1,500 rounds per minute when all 3 barrels fired together. What they also had were German formations preparing for a major push scheduled for March 23rd, a coordinated assault involving elements of the 11th Panzer Division's remaining infantry, the 9th Panzer Division's grenadier units, and assorted Volkssturm battalions. German intelligence estimated American defensive positions held approximately 8,200 combat-effective troops across an 11-kilometer perimeter. The German attack force numbered approximately 12,000 men. If you want to see how American ingenuity turned 3 machine guns into one of the most feared defensive weapons of the final months of World War II, hit that like button and subscribe for more forgotten weapons of history. Back to Sergeant Mitchell. The T-85 multiple machine gun mount looked like something assembled in a fever dream by an ordnance officer who'd consumed too much coffee and too little sleep. 3 M1919 Browning machine guns mounted in parallel on a triangular cradle, barrels separated by exactly 8.5 inches, all aimed at the same point 500 meters distant. The entire assembly sat on a modified M2 tripod, reinforced with additional bracing and a heavier central pivot. Total weight, 187 pounds with 3 guns, 2 18 pounds, when loaded with 3 250-round ammunition belts. The genius and the terror lay in the firing mechanism. Standard M1919 operation required the gunner to grip 2 spade handles and press a thumb trigger. The T-85 modified this. A single butterfly trigger connected to all 3 guns through a mechanical linkage, essentially 3 separate trigger bars activated simultaneously by one movement. Pull the trigger, 3 guns fired. Release, all 3 stopped. No individual gun control, no selective fire. All 3 together, or nothing. The ammunition feed system used 3 separate belt boxes, each holding 250 rounds of standard .30-06 M2 ball ammunition. The belts fed from the left side of each gun, ejecting spent cases to the right. In practice, this created a cascade of brass casings that piled up in seconds, approximately 25 empty cases per second when all 3 guns fired continuously. Crews quickly learned to position themselves to avoid the literal shower of hot brass that accumulated around the mount. Barrel cooling presented the primary engineering challenge. A single M1919 could fire approximately 200 rounds before barrel temperature reached unsafe levels requiring barrel changes. With 3 guns generating triple the heat in the same confined space, thermal management became critical. The solution involved 2 modifications. First, spacing the guns 8.5 inches apart allowed some air circulation between barrels. Second, crews learned to fire in controlled bursts of 75 to 100 rounds, 10 to 13 seconds of firing, allowing ambient air to cool barrels between bursts. Effective range matched the standard M1919. Maximum effective range of 100 meters, though practical suppression range topped out around 800 meters. But suppression effectiveness increased exponentially. Where a single M1919 fired 1 bullet per meter at 500 meters distance, the T85 put 3 bullets in the same space, turning suppression from likely to keep heads down to instant death for anything exposed. The mount's traverse allowed 360-degree rotation with 60 degrees of elevation, though practical ground employment typically used 45 degrees or less. The weight necessitated a crew of 4, 1 gunner, 1 assistant gunner managing ammunition, and 2 loaders keeping belt boxes filled and ready. Sergeant First Class Harold Remke, assigned to weapon familiarization on March 20th, described his first live fire test. We set it up facing a burned-out farmhouse at 600 meters, loaded 3 belts. I hit the trigger for maybe 5 seconds. The entire front wall of that building just disappeared. Not collapsed, disappeared, turned into dust and brick fragments. I'd been firing machine guns since North Africa. Never seen anything do that. The unofficial nickname came within hours: Triple Threat. The official designation, T85 multiple machine gun mount, caliber 30, never caught on. Soldiers called them triple threats, 3-headed dogs, and later, after German prisoners began talking, iron rain guns. 14 units reached the bridgehead. Field commanders had 4 days to figure out how to use them before the expected German assault. March 23rd, 4:30 hours. Mitchell's position receives whispered word from the company commander. German attack imminent. Estimated battalion strength. Expected within 2 hours. His foxhole sits on the left flank of Company B, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, 9th Armored Division. The position overlooks a cleared field approximately 400 meters wide, bordered by woods to the east and southeast. Perfect kill zone, except Company B only has 3 standard M1919s to cover nearly 800 meters of frontage. Except now they have something else. At 4:45 hours, a weapons squad arrives carrying components of the T85 mount. Mitchell has heard rumors, something about triple machine guns, something experimental. He watches as 4 men assemble the mount 15 meters to his right, working by feel in the pre-dawn darkness. The distinctive profile emerges, 3 barrels pointing east like a mechanical Cerberus. The crew chief, Corporal Eddie Vasquez, from El Paso, Texas, runs through a functions check Mitchell can barely see, but definitely hears. 3 distinct metallic clanks as charging handles rack back and forward. 3 ammunition belts feed into the darkness. Vasquez pats the center gun almost affectionately, then settles into the gunner's position. 5:17 hours. First light starts touching the eastern tree line. 5:29 hours. Movement, lots of movement. Figures resolving from the woods, spreading into a skirmish line. Mitchell counts, loses count, estimates 200 men, maybe more. They're 800 meters out, moving fast in practiced rushes, using every depression for cover. The standard M1919s to Mitchell's left and right open fire at 600 meters. Controlled bursts, 6 to 8 rounds. Pause, traverse, 6 to 8 more rounds. Professional, disciplined fire. Germans go down. Not enough Germans. The German line keeps coming, 500 meters. Mitchell can see individual uniforms now. Field gray against brown earth. They're good. Really good. Moving in teams, one group covering while another advances. The kind of tactical discipline that takes years to develop. These aren't Volkssturm civilians with rifles. These are veterans. 450 meters. The standard M1919s are firing continuously now, emergency rates, barrels starting to glow. They're hitting Germans, definitely hitting them, but the line keeps compressing, keeps advancing. Basic math, 200 attackers, 3 machine guns, not enough bullets per second to stop them all. Vasquez hasn't fired yet. He's waiting, tracking the German advance through his sights, left hand resting on the butterfly trigger. 400 meters. German small arms fire starts cracking overhead. They're shooting while moving, suppressing American positions to cover their assault. Standard tactics. Excellent execution. 375 meters. Vasquez fires. The sound hits like a physical force. Not the familiar staccato of an M1919, but a sustained roar, a mechanical avalanche of noise that drowns out everything else on the battlefield. Mitchell can't hear the German rifles anymore. Can't hear the other M1919s. Can't hear his own thoughts. There's just the roar, continuous and overwhelming, like standing inside a thunderstorm. He looks toward the German assault line. It's gone. Not retreating. Not taking cover. Just gone. Where there were 200 men 3 seconds ago, there's now churned earth, bodies, fragments of equipment, and dust clouds hanging in the still morning air. The Triple Threat's beaten zone, the area where all 3 guns' fire converges, is approximately 50 meters wide at 375 meters. Everything in that zone simply ceased to exist. Everything. Vasquez traverses left, still firing. The roar continues. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. He's firing in a sweeping motion, left to right, creating an arc of destruction 200 meters wide. German soldiers who survived the initial burst are running now, sprinting back toward the tree line, abandoning weapons, abandoning wounded comrades, just running. 20 seconds total firing time. All 3 ammunition belts empty, 750 rounds expended. The German assault on Company B's sector is over. Mitchell conducts a count after the firing stops. In the 200-meter frontage directly before the Triple Threat's position, American spotters identify 73 German dead, 29 wounded still moving, unknown number of wounded, unable to move. Conservative estimate, at least 102 casualties from a 20-second burst of fire. The 2 other German assault groups, hitting positions north and south of Company B, continued their attacks for another 40 minutes before withdrawing. The sector defended by the Triple Threat sees no further German advance attempts that day. Vasquez's crew spends the next 20 minutes changing barrels on all 3 guns. The barrels are too hot to touch, requiring asbestos gloves and water cooling. They reload. Wait. The Germans don't come back. German radio intercepts that evening, translated by First Army intelligence, include references to Drei Maschinengewehr zusammen, 3 machine guns together, and Eisenregen, Iron Rain. One intercepted transmission from a German battalion commander to his regimental headquarters reads, "Advance impossible. Enemy employs new automatic weapon. Casualties prohibitive. Request artillery support or withdrawal authorization." They got neither. But they stopped attacking Company B's position. News of the Triple Threat's effectiveness spread through First Army within hours. By March 24th, all 14 T85 mounts at Remagen were operational, distributed across the bridgehead's most vulnerable sectors. Field commanders immediately requested more. First Army Ordnance located an additional 23 units at various depots in France and Belgium, originally stockpiled for anti-aircraft use, now repurposed for ground suppression. The logistics proved challenging. Each triple threat required 3 times the ammunition of a standard M1919, and sustained firing drained ammunition reserves at alarming rates. A single crew could expend 2,000 rounds, nearly 10 basic loads, in less than 15 minutes of intermittent firing. Ammunition supply became the limiting factor, not the weapon itself. First Army established priority ammunition allocation. Triple threat positions received 5,000 rounds per day per mount, 20 250-round belts. This represented approximately 15% of the entire bridgehead's daily €30 allocation, going to just 14 weapons. Standard M1919 positions received 1,200 rounds per day. The math worked because the triple threats could do the work of 3 to 5 standard guns when positioned correctly. Tactical employment evolved rapidly through trial and error. Early deployments positioned triple threats as direct line weapons, essentially heavy machine guns that happened to have 3 barrels. This proved wasteful. The weapon's true value emerged when field commanders used them as area denial weapons, similar to artillery. Position a triple threat to cover a key avenue of approach, a road junction, a bridge, a valley floor, and announce its presence with a demonstration burst. German forces learned to avoid those areas entirely. Lieutenant Colonel William Hoffman, 78th Infantry Division, reported on March 29th. Position 2 triple threat mounts covering approaches to our southern flank. Fired demonstration bursts at 7 and 15 hours daily for 3 days. German reconnaissance observed, but made no attack attempts in those sectors. Attacks concentrated on positions without triple threats, where we employed conventional weapons. The psychological impact matched the physical destruction. German prisoners interrogated after Remagen consistently overestimated American firepower. Estimates ranged from 12 machine guns firing together to automatic cannons. Several prisoners insisted Americans had deployed new secret automatic weapons that couldn't be survived. The reality, 3 conventional machine guns on 1 mount, never seemed to register. Production records show that between March 23rd and April 18, 1945, triple threats at Remagen expended approximately 847,000 rounds of 30-06 ammunition. This represented 3.2% of total ammunition fired by First Army during the same period, but accounted for an estimated 14 to or 18% of confirmed German casualties in defensive engagements, casualty efficiency roughly 5.5 times higher than standard weapons. The weapons weren't invincible. 3 triple threats were destroyed by German artillery after being identified through aerial reconnaissance. 2 more suffered catastrophic mechanical failures when crews attempted to fire beyond thermal limits. All 3 barrels warped simultaneously, rendering the entire assembly useless. Another mount was abandoned during a tactical withdrawal when its crew couldn't move the 2-14-pound assembly fast enough. But the surviving weapons performed. After-action reports from March-April 1945 document 127 separate engagements where triple threats fired in defensive roles. Of these, 89 resulted in complete repulse of German attacks. The remaining 38 saw German forces withdraw before reaching American positions. Not a single engagement, where a triple threat was operational, saw Germans successfully overrun the defended position. Enemy perspective emerged through captured documents. A German after-action report from 11th Panzer Division, dated March 27, 1945, describes an attack on American positions near Honnef. Assault groups encountered concentrated automatic weapons fire of unprecedented intensity. Advancing under such fire proved impossible. Casualties in forward elements reached 60% within 3 minutes. Attack canceled. The German report estimated American defensive positions contained 12 to 15 heavy machine guns. Actual count: 1 triple threat and 2 standard M1919s. The engineering behind synchronized triple-barrel fire required solving problems that weren't immediately obvious. Primary among these, timing. The M1919A4 operates on a recoil-operated, air-cooled mechanism, firing from a closed bolt. Each gun in a triple-threat configuration had slightly different characteristics: manufacturing tolerances, wear patterns, spring tension variations. Left to fire independently, 3 guns wouldn't maintain synchronization. One might fire at 495 rounds per minute, another at 515, the third at 502. Over time, this created a walking effect, where the combined beat zone would shift unpredictably. The T85 mount addressed this through mechanical linkage. All 3 guns connected to one trigger mechanism, but each gun's actual firing depended on its individual bolt cycle. The system didn't force synchronization. It simply allowed all 3 guns to fire whenever the trigger was depressed and their individual mechanisms were ready. In practice, this created what ballisticians called statistical synchronization. Enough overlap that the combined fire appeared unified, but enough variation that the beaten zone had natural dispersion rather than 3 perfectly aligned streams. This proved advantageous. Perfect synchronization would have created 3 parallel bullet trajectories with gaps between them. Statistical synchronization created a cone of fire approximately 50 meters wide at 500 meters distance, much more effective for suppression. Barrel overheating remained the Achilles heel. Standard M1919A4 doctrine called for barrel changes every 200 rounds of sustained fire. The triple threat generated 3 times the heat in a confined space, raising ambient temperature around all 3 barrels. Crews discovered that after 150 rounds of combined fire, 50 rounds per barrel, all 3 barrels approached unsafe temperatures simultaneously. The solution involved disciplined fire control. Gunners learned to fire in 10-second bursts, approximately 250 combined rounds, then pause for 30 seconds, allowing air cooling. This created a sustainable cycle: fire, cool, fire, cool. Crews who ignored this discipline experienced barrel failures, and replacing 3 warped barrels simultaneously took approximately 45 minutes, effectively removing the weapon from combat for nearly an hour. Ammunition feed proved surprisingly reliable. The M1919's belt feed system had been perfected over decades. Running 3 in parallel introduced no new mechanical problems, provided the belts were properly loaded and fed smoothly. The primary issue was logistics. Keeping 3 ammunition boxes filled while under fire required 2 dedicated loaders working continuously. The mount's weight, while substantial, distributed reasonably across its reinforced tripod. Setup time averaged 8-12 minutes with a trained crew. Breakdown time, 10 to 15 minutes. This meant triple threats couldn't be rapidly repositioned during fluid combat. Once emplaced, they stayed put until the tactical situation stabilized. Comparison to German equivalents revealed why the weapon proved so effective. Germany's closest equivalent was the MG-42 in sustained fire mode, mounted on a tripod with a 300-round belt. The MG-42 fired approximately 1,200 rounds per minute. Impressive, but still less than a Triple Threat's 1,500 combined rounds per minute. More importantly, the MG-42's high fire rate created severe barrel heating problems. Practical sustained fire rate, approximately 250-300 rounds per minute, requiring frequent barrel changes. German doctrine addressed this by deploying multiple MG-42s in overlapping positions. But equipment shortages in 1945 meant German units rarely had their full complement of machine guns. A German company that should have fielded 6 MG-42s often operated with 3 or 4. The Triple Threat, by concentrating 3 guns in one position, achieved the defensive coverage of 3 German positions while requiring only 1 crew location. Maintenance proved demanding. 3 guns meant 3 mechanisms requiring cleaning, 3 barrels needing inspection, 3 recoil assemblies needing monitoring. Crews spent approximately 2 hours per day on maintenance, significantly more than the 45 minutes required for a single M1919. But commanders deemed this acceptable, given the tactical advantage. Ammunition consumption created supply chain stress. Standard planning allocated 1,500 rounds per day per M1919. Triple Threats could fire that in 2 minutes. Actual daily allocation of 5,000 rounds represented a compromise between operational effectiveness and logistical reality. Crews learned to choose their moments, firing only when targets justified the expenditure. The weapon's limitations were clear: immobile once emplaced, ammunition intensive, maintenance heavy, vulnerable to indirect fire. But in defensive positions, where these limitations mattered less, the Triple Threat provided firepower that nothing else in the American arsenal could match at the squad or platoon level. The Triple Threat's operational life proved remarkably brief. Production of T85 mounts ceased on April 2, 1945, when Ordnance Department analysis concluded that the war's end was imminent and resources should focus on equipment that would cease service in the Pacific. Total production, 147 units. Of these, 37 saw combat in Europe during March through April 1945. The remainder stayed in depot storage. Plans to deploy Triple Threats to the Pacific Theater were drafted in late April 1945, with focus on using the weapons during the anticipated invasion of Japan. Logistics officers proposed positioning the mounts in defensive perimeters around beachhead positions, where Japanese banzai charges could be engaged with overwhelming firepower. The plans were detailed, specific, and ultimately unnecessary. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The Triple Threats never deployed to the Pacific. Post-war assessment by Army Ground Forces concluded that while the T85 mount demonstrated tactical effectiveness, its operational limitations outweighed its advantages in mobile warfare. The weapon required defensive positions, ammunition abundance, and tactical situations where concentrated firepower mattered more than mobility. The emerging doctrine for Cold War conflicts emphasized mobility, mechanization, and nuclear capability. Multi-barrel machine guns didn't fit. The Army formally retired the T-85 designation on June 12, 1947. Remaining units were either scrapped or stored in long-term depots. Several ended up at Aberdeen Proving Ground for historical preservation. One mount, serial number T850033, is currently displayed at the National Museum of the United States Army in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, labeled simply as Multiple Machine Gun Mount, Experimental. Classified status attached to the weapons remained in effect until September 1968, when the Army declassified World War II ordnance documents that no longer held strategic value. Even then, few historians noticed. The triple threat remained a footnote, mentioned briefly in divisional after-action reports but rarely elaborated upon. The concept, however, survived. Modern military forces use multiple-barrel weapons extensively: the M134 minigun, the GAU-8 Avenger, the Phalanx CIWS. These weapons operate on different principles: rotary barrels, electric drive systems, higher calibers, but share the fundamental insight that the triple threat demonstrated. Concentrated, synchronized fire from multiple barrels creates effects that single-barrel weapons cannot match. The GAU-19, a 3-barrel 50 caliber Gatling gun developed in the 1980s, uses design principles remarkably similar to the T85. Multiple barrels, synchronized fire, overwhelming volume. The engineers who designed it probably never heard of the triple threat. They didn't need to. The concept proves itself across generations. Sergeant James Mitchell survived the war. Returned to Iowa, worked as a machinist for 43 years, raised 4 children. He rarely talked about Remagen, except to note that he'd been there. In 1988, interviewed for a local newspaper's Veterans Day feature, he mentioned the triple-barrel machine gun exactly once. "We had this weapon, 3 barrels. Saved a lot of lives, I think. Theirs and ours." He understood something that takes distance to appreciate. The triple threat's real accomplishment wasn't killing Germans. It was stopping attacks before they developed, before men on both sides died in close combat, before positions were overrun and retaken at terrible cost. The weapon's presence changed German tactical decisions, changed what commanders attempted, changed casualty rates on both sides. Corporal Eddie Vasquez, the gunner who fired the first combat burst at 5:47 hours on March 23rd, survived the war but died in a car accident in El Paso in 1953, 8 years after Remagen. His service record mentions qualification on special weapons, but provides no details. The Army didn't publicize the triple threat, didn't issue commendations specific to its use. The weapon remained officially classified until most of the men who'd used it had already passed away or moved on. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Thackeray, who authorized the emergency deployment, retired from the Army in 1946 with a Legion of Merit for exceptional service in ordnance operations. The citation doesn't mention the T85 mounts, doesn't mention Remagen, doesn't mention the 847,000 rounds of 30.06 ammunition that created the Iron Rain. Thackeray died in 1979, his obituary noting his World War II service without elaboration. The Germans who survived encountering the triple threat carried their own memories. Post-war interviews with Wehrmacht veterans occasionally reference American automatic weapons of unusual intensity or multiple machine guns fired together. Few connected these memories to a specific weapon system. They simply remembered the sound, the effect, the impossibility of advancing into that fire. The weapon itself disappeared into storage, then museums, then footnotes. But for approximately 4 weeks, in the spring of 1945, on a bridgehead across the Rhine River, it represented something important. American industrial capacity turned toward solving tactical problems, even in the war's final months. The willingness to experiment, to repurpose equipment designed for one role into another, to trust soldiers with weapons nobody had trained on and see what they could accomplish. The triple threat wasn't developed in laboratories or testing grounds. It was created by repurposing anti-aircraft mounts, because soldiers needed something that didn't exist and couldn't wait for bureaucracy to catch up. It saved lives, American lives, probably German lives too, by stopping attacks before they became slaughters. Then it disappeared from history because that's what happens to expedient solutions in wartime. They do their job, then get forgotten. If this story of battlefield innovation and the men who made it work resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more forgotten weapons of World War II. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into the equipment that changed combat but never made the textbooks. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and if anyone in your family served during World War II. These stories matter because the people in them mattered. They improvised, adapted, and survived in circumstances we can barely imagine. The Iron Rain fell for 4 weeks in 1945, then stopped. But the men who called it down and the men who survived it deserve to be remembered. That's why we're here. That's why these stories need telling.